What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Commercial Intelligence Podcast. So this is the first episode, so I want to start at the beginning, not with any random tactics or tools or theory, but with how we actually think about commercial intelligence and why we believe it matters, so much so that we've called the title of this podcast Commercial Intelligence Podcast. So over the last year, we've been building a commercial intelligence tool for our own business and for our clients at CSM. And honestly, the biggest value hasn't been all about the technology itself. It's actually been about learning around commercial intelligence, watching how companies make decisions, watching where they get stuck, and watching how often very smart people are flying blind without realizing it in business. And, you know, our organization really feels like there's a bit of an obligation to talk about it more. Hence why we've set up this podcast, because commercial intelligence isn't something that gets discovered openly. People obviously talk about growth, but they don't necessarily talk about commercial intelligence. It's not a hot topic. So the objective of this podcast is to make it a hot topic, to talk about scaling, to talk about pipeline and performance and measured growth. So when I say commercial intelligence, what I really mean is your ability to make the right decisions by leveraging your internal data and your internal intelligence wisely. So questions like, how quickly can you tell what's working from a growth perspective? How confidently can you say what's not working? Where are your bottlenecks and where are your growth levers? How early do you see it before it shows up as a problem, where your cost per click or your cost per lead is not to the standard that it needs to be, or your close rates aren't? And that's the lens that we always start from, is asking some of those more difficult questions, like what is your cost per lead through the different forms of lead generation that you are actively working on a month to month. So in most B2B businesses, you've got outbound, inbound, nearbound, and they generate leads. So let's take inbound as an example. You might be running ads across LinkedIn or Google or Meta. You might be getting leads through SEO, or even now through generative search. And they might all differ in terms of the cost per lead, but understanding what is that cost per lead, and then understanding what are your close rates from your sales team. And most businesses live and die based on their pipeline. But if you break down growth-related activities like marketing spend, sales pipeline, conversion rates, deal velocity, retention, expansion, that's the engine. Everything else supports it. But what we feel is wild is how little shared clarity there often is around those different functions within a business. You'll have a marketing director looking at lead volume and cost per lead. You'll have a sales director looking at pipeline value and close rates. You'll have a founder and maybe a finance director looking at revenue and P&L. And the finance team is obviously looking at burn rate and margins. You have operations trying to keep the wheels on and make sure that you're delivering on a good product or service. Everyone's looking at different, I suppose, a different slice of the reality, different dashboards, different language, different incentives. And then they walk into a boardroom and try to make a decision together. And I think that's the main thing, is where it breaks down, is that everything in business is broken into these silos. And we're big believers in RevOps, and especially when it comes to growth, is like going in with a RevOps mentality around growth and how these teams work more together, more closely in their decision making, as opposed to decisions on behalf of themselves and their department. I think that's where it breaks down and the blame game starts to happen. Marketing blame sales for not closing deals, and sales blame marketing for poor leads. Because if you're spending money on Meta, LinkedIn, Google, and leads are coming in, pipeline might look healthy, but revenue stalls. Marketing says the ads are working, but then sales says the leads aren't qualified. Finance says CAC is creeping up. The founder feels something is off, but can't pinpoint where. And that's not a people problem, that's an intelligence problem. The feedback loop is broken. And feedback loops are so important when you're scaling. Where is the bottleneck? What is holding us back? And what's moving the needle forward? Where are the levers that we can double our effort and our time and our resources? We only have an infinite amount of time, money, and resources, and we want to double down on the levers and get rid of the bottlenecks. So what we've learned is that growth depends on tight feedback loops, fast ones, honest ones, loops that connect spend to outcome, not just activity to activity. And AI becomes really interesting here. I mean, for the most part, AI has transformed our business and a lot of our clients' businesses, not because it's flashy, but because it's very good at one thing, which is pattern recognition. It can sit across your data constantly, 24/7, watching what happens when you change spend, watch what happens when messaging shifts, watching which leads turn into real pipeline, which deals stall, which ones accelerate, and why. Humans can obviously do this, but AI, the one thing that we've learned is that because it's so good at pattern recognition, it spots things faster than humans do. Humans can't do that consistently. We're too busy, we're too biased, we're too siloed. So instead of quarterly reviews and postmortems, you get ongoing intelligence. And this is where commercial intelligence starts to feel different from traditional analytics. It's not retrospective. I suppose it's observational. It's connective. It's saying, here's what's happening across the whole growth system right now. And that changes behavior. Marketing starts optimizing for revenue, not leads. Sales starts feeding back real objections, not just outcomes. And finance stops being a blocker and starts being a guide. And then leadership stops guessing and starts making decisions quicker. So another big thing we've noticed is how much money gets wasted on the wrong decisions and in this sort of silo structure. Because it's if you're operating in silos, marketing optimizes something sales can't see, and then sales sells things ops struggle to deliver on, and then finance cuts spend without understanding that downstream impact. Commercial intelligence forces a level of alignment because it exposes cause and effect. I think when you expose cause and effect, it actually creates this level of alignment that we've never seen before. I think only since the introduction of AI, we have AI agents studying data 24/7 and highlighting the bottlenecks and the levers to growth. And like to the point where it's now saying like spending on this channel leads to this quality of pipeline. And this type of deal leads to this type of margin. And this customer profile leads to this level of retention. Because it's constantly learning about your customer, about your market, about from complete unawareness to paying customer, the nuances, the differences. And once you can see that clearly, decisions start to get simpler, not just easier, but clearer. And clarity is what drives growth. Clarity on your decisions. So let me leave you with a couple of practical takeaways to kind of think about this in your own business. The first one is when you spend money on growth, how long does it take you to know if it worked? Not clicks, not leads, but has it actually, gone into the pipeline, like actually worked? And work backwards is like just simple metrics like your cost per lead and your close rates. At its two basic metrics, do you know that in your business across the different channels? If marketing and sales disagree tomorrow, whose data would win, or would it just become a debate? Where are your feedback loops slow, manual, or emotional? And that's usually where intelligence is missing. And lastly, if you removed, the different department head titles and opinions from the room, would your data tell a clear story about what to do next? That's really what commercial intelligence is about for us, using your own data, connecting it properly, letting patterns emerge, and making better decisions faster without relying on gut feel alone. So this is just a bit of an intro to the topic. Of course, we're going to be delving into this in a lot more detail throughout the coming weeks and months. But this podcast is going to explore that from a few different angles, from growth, decision-making, alignment, mistakes, what we're starting to see with clients and in our own business. Live, I'm going to be updating you around this progression because it's a very exciting phase that we're in terms of we've already deployed this in our own business over the last year. And this is a way of hopefully encouraging other businesses to think in this way. Things that are actually working in practice. We're trying to come at this, with no theory for the sake of theory. Just how businesses really grow when they can see clearly. So, hope this resonates, and if it does, I'll see you in the next one.